Yes, the New Orleans Saints absolutely need to be considering a potential trade for San Francisco 49ers wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk, and that's not a hard conclusion to come by. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, yes, the New Orleans Saints should be interested in a potential Brandon Aiyuk trade. We're going to break it all down today. We'll take a look at why a contract could be what gets in the way. We'll also take a look at how his play style is perfect for what the New Orleans Saints want to be in 2024. And we're going to kick off today's episode with why the New Orleans Saints should be considering this and what it might take to get Brandon Aiyuk to New Orleans if they decide to go down that road. We appreciate you very much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day, and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed, terms apply. Yes, this is easy. The New Orleans Saints absolutely should be interested in a trade for Brandon Aiyuk from the San Francisco 49ers. Look, I don't get to do this very often, okay? It's not very often that some player, somehow, there's some inkling that that player might become available, or that player is indeed available, or that player gets cut, and I get a rash of messages that are asking, hey, Ross, should the New Orleans Saints go after this? And I am, without hesitation, saying yes. Typically, it's like, well, does the team need it? What's the roster construction? No. I don't care if the New Orleans Saints still had Michael Thomas on this roster. You consider going after Brandon Aiyuk from the San Francisco 49ers. Why? We broke down a couple of episodes ago. The Saints actually have, I believe, what they need to produce at wide receiver. I don't know, if they have what it will take to be a top flight number one passing attack in the NFL. I think you've got Derek Carr, you've got Chris Olave as your kind of marquee wide receiver that a lot of people know of, but you don't really have those other household names. Now, Rashid Shaheed is an absolute game breaker. There's no doubt about that. But could you benefit from having a specified, specialized, outside threat? And that's where Brandon Aiyuk has a big time fit. Also, he's a playmaker. When we talk about a guy who just had 1,300 receiving yards last season, 1,342, 7 touchdowns last season. Now, I think a lot of people mistake Brandon Aiyuk as this massive yards after catch threat, and that's not really who he's proven to be. 2023, only 28.5% of his yards came after the catch. 2022, a little bit higher, 38.2%, but compare that to Deebo Samuel, who's gotten 50% of his yards after the catch in each of the last 3 seasons. Not the same, okay? But that's okay. He's still somebody that can contribute from a yards after catch perspective and viewpoint. He had 5.1 yards after catch per reception last year. That's a full yard more than guys like Chris Olave, who led the position wide receiver after a qualifying amount of receptions. So it works, right? It's still enough, right? It doesn't make you go, oh, well, I guess because he's not picking up 50% of his yards after the catch, what use is he? No. It's still Brandon Aiyuk, and you should still be considering this. For the Saints, I think that, and we're going to dive into like the play style and how it complements what it is that the New Orleans Saints want to be so well, and how actually Brandon Aiyuk and Chris Olave complement each other super well, and how that would also complement Rashid Shaheed. We'll get to all that. But I do want to mention, like, that's all part of the why behind why you should be interested. Now, look, a trade might not happen, okay? In fact, I'd probably say 90% it's not going to happen, but it doesn't mean that the New Orleans Saints shouldn't be interested, and it doesn't mean that Mickey Loomis shouldn't be on the phone with John Lynch, at least checking in, right? Look, San Francisco's asking price is going to be a first-round pick. Who cares? Who cares? Every team asks for a first-round pick for every player that they might end up trading. They never get the first-round pick, okay? In fact, teams are so scared of actually getting what it is that they bargained for that sometimes they get what it is that they're asking for and they turn it down and then have to settle for less later, like the Carolina Panthers did with Brian Burns, when they could have gotten a pair of first-round picks from the Los Angeles Rams and then went, oh, no, maybe not. And then they ended up having to trade him for what, a second, a 5? Like, goodness. So teams can ask for whatever they want their asking price to be, and the asking price should always be high. But what they typically get usually comes in under that. And there's some momentum towards that as well. San Francisco Chronicle writer Mike Silver, back before the 2024 draft. Okay, so this is looking at draft capital from 2024 and 2025. This was written literally the day of the draft, as they were recapping this over at SI. Mike Silver says that an NFL executive told him that a second-round pick and a 2025 third-round pick might be enough to get a deal done. Think about that for a moment. That was before the draft. Now you're into this point to where value's low, wide receiver value is low, wide receiver contracts are really, really high. You're at an impasse with this player. Brandon Aiyuk wants closer to $30 million, kind of the vein of Amon-Ra St. Brown, the wide receiver, spectacular wide receiver over the Detroit Lions. San Francisco 49ers sound like they don't want to go any higher than $26 million, which is an insult to Brandon Aiyuk, who was one of the game's top wideouts last year and has consistently been a top wideout. Played 16 to 17 games last year, 17 to 17 games the year before that, so you can't put the injury tag on him. There's just no excuse to not want to pay this guy other than the fact that you already have Deebo Samuel. You've already gone through contract stuff with Deebo. You went through trade requests with Deebo, all this other stuff. Drafted Ricky Pearsall out of Florida, drafted Jacob Cowing out of Arizona. And so now maybe you're thinking to yourself, we could survive without him, which fine. Honestly, in that system, Shanahan, all that, you probably could. They could play fast and loose when it comes to all that and really haggle over $2 million per year if they want to. And again, APY doesn't mean anything. Only the guarantees mean something. So they don't have the leverage in a negotiation in that case because they're willingly saying, we'll see how this plays out. So if you can move a 2025 second and a 2026 third, heck, I'd even go so far as a 2025 second and a 2026 second as well, 2 second-round picks for a Brandon Aiyuk, it's kind of hard to say no as long as you're getting him for more than a 1-year rental. If you're getting him for a 1-year rental, then you trade this year's draft stock. You trade a second, you trade a fifth, and then you hope that he plays great for you for a year. San Francisco just did this with Chase Young. Of course, they waited until in the season to do it. But you do that, and then he goes and he signs a big deal somewhere, and then you potentially get a compensatory third-round pick because he signs a big deal somewhere else as these wide receiver contracts continue to explode. So if you can get it done for some combination of a second and a third, some combination of a pick this year, a pick next year, it's hard to say no. San Francisco can ask for a first-round pick all they want. It's unlikely they're going to get it. And that could work in addition to the way that whole situation's going down over there, where they're haggling over money that doesn't mean anything, and they're posturing for the most part. Saints could cut in, or the Steelers, or the Jaguars, whoever, right? Several teams that could be involved in this, but I think the New Orleans Saints are a good fit, and I think that the New Orleans Saints should be on the phone with San Francisco, at least not doing themselves the disservice of not checking in, right? Go and check in, see what you can get done. But really the thing that sells me on this too, beyond just the asking price or what the price would typically be to trade for a wide receiver in this circumstance, is the fit for New Orleans, because everything that New Orleans is trying to be, Brandon Aiyuk already is. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at Game Time, the absolute best destination for last-minute tickets. The only place that I purchase tickets when I need tickets to an event, whether it's sports, whether it's comedy, theater, music, whatever it might be. There's a ton to find over at Game Time. They're already selling some tickets already on sale for the Saints and Titans preseason game, which would be the closing preseason game ahead of the year, and so much more. The last minute deals are my favorite. You save up to 60% buying last minute tickets with Game Time. You can also check out their zone deals. You can check out their seat views. You can actually see the view from your seat before you buy it. And my favorite, all-in pricing, a feature you can toggle on so that you can actually see the total up front. No hidden fees or anything like that. You can see it all by toggling on all-in pricing. So it'll help you take all the guesswork out of buying tickets today with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints and Brandon Aiyuk would be a match made in heaven with the team's new offensive system. We appreciate you very much for being here for another episode of Locked On Saints and making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Sports Today's 24/7 stream. All the news going on around the world of sports from the national scale, but the local focus, giving you the in-depth details from the people that know the teams the best on the biggest news around sports, all on a 24/7 stream. You can find it on Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everything that the New Orleans Saints want to be in 2024 with their new offense and Klint Kubiak coming in from the San Francisco 49ers, Brandon Aiyuk has already been, already is, and already will continue to be. Little shout out. Little shout out to the best there was, best there is, best there ever will be. I kind of got it in there. But you can see it. You can see the vision, because everything that the New Orleans Saints want to be is what Brandon Aiyuk is, right? Maybe you want a little bit more of the yards after catch, as we just highlighted. Less than 40% of his yards over the course of the past two seasons have come after the catch. That's very different than what Deebo Samuel makes you believe about the entire San Francisco 49ers offense, which he has pulled in over 50% of his yards after the catch in each of the last three seasons. But beyond that, I think we have to look more in depth about how it is that Brandon Aiyuk is a fit. Last year, we saw a nice little tick up for Chris Olave, who took 39.5% of his snaps from the slot. So a nice little bump up from where he was the year before. So they're moving him around. He also took 3.9% of his snaps out of the backfield, by the way. So definitely worth keeping an eye out to see how those potential numbers will continue to climb in 2024, which is logical. They like to move Chris Olave around and do all those other things. So how about a guy like Brandon Aiyuk, who in 2022 played 81.3% of his snaps that were sampled by reception perception on the outside and was on the line of scrimmage even more than that. He was the guy, okay? The guy. When you think about how Michael Thomas played for the New Orleans Saints, and we talked all about how Michael Thomas and Chris Olave were like a match made in heaven, those two as complementary wide receivers. You had one that was the lone split end, out wide by himself on the weak side, right up on the line of scrimmage, ready to take on press coverage, all that other stuff. And then you had Chris Olave, who was the speedster that would line up a little bit off the line of scrimmage and allow that space to be something that he could utilize, eat up in front of a defensive back. That is what you would get here with Brandon Aiyuk and Chris Olave as well. It's the type of wide receiver tandem to where if you put them together, you're going, oh, okay, great. Those guys are all pros in 2024 because of the way that they would complement one another. The other thing to keep an eye out on too is the style of route running that they both utilize and where they both have the most success on the field. Now, the fun thing about Chris Olave is that, like our friends over at Reception Perception, who chart every route and all that sort of stuff, they break things down by success of route as well as route percentage. What did they run the most? What did they run the least? All that. Chris Olave, very heavily used in the flat, very heavily used on outs, where you kind of run a 90-degree angle going towards the sideline, running away from the quarterback, or curls, which is kind of that you push up field and then you work your way back towards the quarterback and the middle of the field. A curl comes back to the line of scrimmage and to the middle of the field. A comeback comes back towards the line of scrimmage, but out towards the sideline. So it's just, do you turn over your right or your left shoulder if you're lined up, wherever you're lined up. That's where that's where his highest percentages of routes run came from, or where some of his highest percentages of routes run came from. However, his production numbers show that he was very, very successful. Higher than what's the lowest I'm going to find here? Higher than a 67.5% success rate on every single route in the route tree except for corner routes, where he was at about 46.2. So the good news is that Chris Olave can be effective, surprise, surprise, running any route on the field. This is why I called him consistently the best route runner in his draft class. Brandon Aiyuk spent a little bit more time attacking the middle of the field. His highest percentages of routes run include digs and posts, as well as the 9 routes where you're just kind of like flying down the field. He also had a heavy amount of comebacks relative to the NFL wide receivers around the NFL as well. So while you have one guy that's kind of operating in this quick, short area, change of pace, short intermediate type stuff, you have another guy in Brandon Aiyuk who's working in the intermediate to deep areas. And of course, Chris Olave can help you in those deep areas as well, and has been particularly effective attacking the middle of the field. 84.6% success rate on slants, 86.7% success rate on digs or in routes, the opposite of an out. You push up, 90-degree turn towards the middle of the field, 82.6% success rate working on the post routes, and then over a 58% success rate flying down the field. Even if you don't remember those percentages, what you need to know is that he's good on the slant, good in the dig, good in the post, good running deep. He's good in the middle of the field. Remember, the New Orleans Saints have made a concerted effort, not at all a coincidence here, have made a concerted effort to start attacking the middle of the field more over the course of their OTA and minicamp work. Why? Because Klint Kubiak's here. That's a big thing that Klint Kubiak wants to be doing. Where was Klint Kubiak most recently? With the San Francisco 49ers. Who attacked the middle of the field really well for the San Francisco 49ers in 2022 and 2023? Brandon Aiyuk. Whatever the New Orleans Saints want to be in 2024, Brandon Aiyuk already be. He already is. And I think that that's one of the things that makes it so obvious that it's like, yeah, you check in. It doesn't mean that a deal is going to get done. It doesn't mean that you're going to even move the needle on a deal. It doesn't mean that Brandon Aiyuk's even going to be on the way out. The only reason why we're having this conversation is because of a 6-second moment in a clip where he's FaceTiming, Brandon Aiyuk is, with Jaden Daniels, quarterback Jaden Daniels of the Washington Commanders, formerly of the LSU Tigers, and former college teammate of Brandon Aiyuk at Arizona State. And he said, I have the quote written down. They said they don't want me back. They said they don't want me back. That's it. And so we're gleaning from that he's talking about the San Francisco 49ers. And so if he does indeed get moved, or if he is indeed on the block, or if there is truly a split ongoing, first of all, what a fumble by the San Francisco 49ers. But secondly, whatever team gets him is going to absolutely love him. He gives you a guy that could be a 3-level threat. He gives you a guy as well that you can be very experimental with. And he gives you a guy, too, that can come in and hold down that X receiver role and allow you to be able to move Chris Olave all over the place. And oh, by the way, you can move Brandon Aiyuk around, too. So the New Orleans Saints, who right now have one marquee name at wide receiver, in terms of, remember when I talk about marquee name, I mean household name NFL-wise, nationally, right? I would call Rashid Shaheed a marquee name amongst the New Orleans Saints wide receivers. For me, it's Chris Olave and it's Rashid Shaheed, and that's your top 2 guys. But then you add a Brandon Aiyuk in, and there's no doubt who your big 3 are. In fact, there's no doubt who your big 2 are, because then you're looking at a wild season in terms of how those 2, Brandon Aiyuk and Chris Olave, might be able to complement one another, as long as it doesn't end up pushing any kind of buttons towards a situation to where there becomes conflict about who the go-to guy is, what opportunity is stood for Chris Olave. These are all things that you're going to have to navigate if you were to make such a move as this. But look, no NFL team should ever stop looking for ways to improve. And we've never seen the New Orleans Saints until maybe this offseason, where they just haven't spent the money. They haven't been making the big moves, stuff like that. They're trying to get right with the salary cap, all that kind of stuff. They haven't necessarily made the big splash move. Chase Young, great move. Willie Gay, great move. But this could be the splash move that says, okay, the Saints have improved their roster. The Saints were given a D by Seth Walder over at ESPN in terms of player moves that were made this offseason and how they haven't improved their roster. It was a big thing that we talked about here on the show. Coaching staff helps, but that's not what was being rated. This move changes that D to an A. right? Like this would be the move of the New Orleans Saints offseason. So how can they get it done? And what would stand in the way? Well, of course, it's time to get nerdy with the contracts. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. One of the big things that would absolutely leave any type of potential deal between the New Orleans Saints and the San Francisco 49ers in an attempt to move Brandon Aiyuk to the Bayou that would leave it dead in the water is contract. Got to break it down. We're going to dig into that here. The one big kind of hurdle that a team would have to clear in trading for Brandon Aiyuk and how they could get it done. We're going to break that down here as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we are your team every day. Coming up on tomorrow's episode, we're going to dive into what the Saints' 2024 success is entirely dependent on. I have three things, three parts to the show. We'll break each of them down, what they are, how important they are and how they can help, how much of a disaster it would be if things don't go well, and how you ensure that the latter is not the case. We're going to break all that down in tomorrow's episode. Trading for Brandon Aiyuk would be, and this is true, a big move by the New Orleans Saints. But what's the one thing that stands in the way? Well, it's the contract. Okay. The New Orleans Saints have right now somewhere about 12 to, I've seen other numbers that say like $15 million of salary cap space available. Now, keep in mind that about $2 million of that or so is going to go towards paying a practice squad once a 53-man roster comes about. Only the top 51 players count against the salary cap, so you would expect a couple more million to go to the 52nd and 53rd players in terms of their cap hits, and then you have to have money ready for IR, trade, deadline, all this other stuff. Now, there is one simple way for the New Orleans Saints to potentially make some money. There's actually two simple ways for the New Orleans Saints to potentially make some more money if they wanted to go about this route. Why would they need to make more money? Let's start there, and then we'll get to what the moves would be. Right now, let's say the New Orleans Saints sit at about $12 million of salary cap space available. That's what we understand the number to be at this moment. That's following the $6.6 million that was opened up in the Taysom Hill restructure from last week. $12 million, hashtag analysis, is less than $14 million. Agreed? Agreed. $14 million right now is Brandon Aiyuk's kind of cap hit, okay, on that fifth-year option and all that other stuff. So what it is that if you trade for a player, they have to fit under your salary cap in order for the trade to actually like work. You could ask the other team to help out, take a little bit of money, restructure the deal, start doing a little bit of the work for you, and eat some of the money in exchange for you paying a higher draft capital in return, right? Paying a higher draft return, but probably don't want to go that route. The Saints have two money-making moves that are still available. The first of which is a smaller money-making move, is that you could clear about $3.3 to $3.9 million by restructuring Juwan Johnson's contract. He currently has a base salary of $5.5 million. No reason for that to still be up there. You could knock that down to 1.21, expend some stuff over the course, or extend some stuff in terms of signing bonuses, all this stuff. You could make the room to help get Brandon Aiyuk in under the salary cap. And then here's where things get really tricky. He wants a contract extension. That's not going to change because he changed teams. That's why teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers make sense as a potential trade partner in this situation. Should Brandon Aiyuk be traded, right? We're still operating in some hypotheticals here. But it's one of the reasons why Pittsburgh should also be on the phone, making the phone call, because they have the money to not only fit him under the salary cap, but they also have the money to restructure his contract and give him an extension, which the Saints could do. They could redo his deal, give him an extension. They have to pay him a lot of money, right? He's wanting nearly $30 million per year. Are you willing to give him that, knowing that Chris Olave could potentially break the bank for you at $40+ million next year if he really, really takes off in 2024, as we expect he will? Or just landing Brandon Aiyuk, keep that from happening, therefore make Chris Olave a little bit cheaper, maybe, but I don't think that's the impact you want to have on your young star wide receiver that you have invested in and invested in and invested in over and over again. And so there lies the other issue, which is the personality issue and the trust issue in terms of generating trust with your team, right? But again, no NFL team should stop looking at opportunities to improve. So you got to figure out which one's more important to you. The Saints will have to figure out which one is more important to them, should this be a bridge that ever begins to cross. The other piece of it too is that for Chris Olave, it's like, oh, no, bring him in. Because you bring him in, more people are paying attention to him. I'm racking up numbers. When people are paying attention to me, he's racking up numbers. We're winning games. My yardage is up. We're winning games. I'm getting my extension. It all works. It all helps, right? Every bit of it. So that's just another part of that mentality there. But the challenging part would be giving Aiyuk the contract that he would want. Now, there's another option, okay? But if we think about it, bringing him in, trading for him, he gets to New Orleans, you redo or you extend his deal, and in the process of extending his deal, you knock down his base salary from this year, make that a part of maybe the signing bonus in addition to the new money signing bonus that you want to give him, and then you just kind of spread everything out and push stuff back to where he's getting paid, $1 million of base salary next year, but he's thriving off of a signing bonus, and maybe you give him a $10 million roster bonus that's on top of that as well. And then, you figure you can restructure that at a later time. And then you can push the majority of the rest of the money down towards the third, fourth, and fifth years of the contract, where you're not currently $85 million over the salary cap like you're expected to be in 2025. And he still gets the money. He still gets the APY. You've guaranteed a ton of money because of signing bonuses and restructures and things like that. There's a lot of ways to be able to kind of make this all work in terms of getting it under the salary cap. Is it the most fiscally responsible thing to do? No, but who cares? Who cares? You're trying to win now. You're trying to win next year. That's what you're worried about. So does this move help you win games? Yes. Is that going to matter more than having to figure out some money stuff later on when you've been genius at balancing your books? Sure, in ways that makes everybody else mad, but you've balanced your books and navigated the situation just fine. So do you trust yourself to continue to do that in exchange for more wins in 2024? Ooh, I think you got to take the wins in 2024. It just feels like that makes sense. And so that's maybe the one hurdle that you really, really have to figure out. The other option is maybe San Francisco doesn't trade Brandon Aiyuk. Brandon Aiyuk sticks around for most of the season. New Orleans, other teams get closer and closer to the trade deadline. Aiyuk is still kind of generally frustrated, generally disgruntled, and therefore the Saints could then trade for him in the middle of the season, where his contract will already be prorated, right? You'll be paying for a fraction of the contract, and you're getting the half-year rental, allowing him to hit the market at the end of the season, and then you recoup a compensatory selection at the end of the year. You kind of take a page out of the San Francisco 49ers book in terms of what they did with Chase Young, and you do that with them with Brandon Aiyuk. Alternatively, you could trade for him now and then use it as a 1-year rental, but going to be tougher, right? He wants the contract. That's going to be a part of the trade at this point. At a later point, if he doesn't end up getting moved and it's just disgruntled and frustration and all this other stuff, he just is going to want out. And therefore, you can get him out for the year and then let him hit the market so that he can decide his own contract at a later time. And look, there might be an opportunity here now for you to be able to say, look, want to bring you to this team, feel like you can be a really great asset, feel like we can maximize you. There's a guy here that you've worked with before that knows how to utilize you. So you're going to something a little bit familiar. And you already have a guaranteed $14 million deal on a 5th-year option. Play your 5th-year option out, hit the market next year, go and get your bag. Go and get more money next year. Kind of set them up in the way that we just saw with T. Higgins over in Cincinnati, where Cincinnati effectively just reserved to saying, well, T. Higgins is effectively playing his last year in Cincinnati, and now T. Higgins just made a ton of money by making that decision to sign his franchise tender and then wait until next year to go into the market after watching all of the wide receiver contracts skyrocket this offseason. Thanks to Justin Jefferson, thanks to Amon-Ra St. Brown, thanks to Jalen Waddle, all that who helped to raise the floor. And of course, thanks to Justin Jefferson in terms of helping to raise the ceiling. This could be another way that maybe could be appealing to Brandon Aiyuk if he's willing to look forward as opposed to looking to now. But that's a big ask to get him to trust that you're going to put him in the best light, that he's going to make it through the season healthy, although he has proven durable over the course of the past few seasons, and then having to make a decision from there. But look, one way or another, New Orleans should be at least checking in on this in terms of doing a service to themselves, in terms of looking at ways to potentially improve here this offseason. Doesn't mean that a deal is going to happen. Very likely probably won't happen. However, checking in is the least that you have to do at this point. Appreciate you very much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, Matt Moscona has made his big return to the Locked On LSU podcast, talking all about Les Miles suing LSU. You want more information on that, make sure you go and check him out over at Locked On LSU for your second listen today. Appreciate you very much, as always, making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know what the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.